for. There is not sufficient, there are not sufficient funds for a much more expensive project. And if the city were to do a general obligation bond or something else, having additional reserves would help to reduce the amount of debt financing that would be required even in that situation. So the message is that while it's difficult oftentimes to make decisions, financial decisions about, to improve a situation for the longer term, not necessarily the next 2 years, I invite you to try to think about that tonight. And in the coming months when the committee actually makes its recommendations to the city council. Lance, what would you like to add to that?
Thank you, Deb and Katie. For those that don't know me, I'm Lance Calvert. I'm the city engineer, just started this year, and sort of working through and inheriting some of these projects, and trying to refine our costs and strategies as we go. One of the big issues that we found recently is massive increases in cost to construct the new water treatment plant, which I think has been talked about a little bit already. Costs are definitively rising in this area, particularly steel, pipe, anything in that kind of construction realm. And that's a lot of, and process and equipment, which is also a lot of manufactured parts. So we're seeing definitive increases in costs that we have not seen for, a couple decades at least. So we're continuing to monitor that and work through that and see how we can strategize on minimizing that expense. But it also comes at the same time as significant increases in debt service rates. So going from low rates to significantly doubled costs. So that has an impact. So a lot of things working against us in this year's rate review issues. So I think we will continue to strategize finance, but the one thing I can tell you is costs are not going down, they're definitively going up, and that impacts how we're able to do business. So I think that's just sort of the overarching theme. Just probably paralleling what you've already heard from Deb and others, and always happy to answer questions, but it's really, I think, trying to be good stewards of the infrastructure that we have and trying to keep things moving forward and advancing in a positive way. And I think there's a question. I see Tom's hand up.
Tom has a question.
Yeah. Do these costs represent what it would cost today, or do they represent what it'll cost 6 years from now or whenever these things will be built?
These costs represent the current today's costs. And so the question becomes, how do we try and reduce that cost, which is also higher than what was previously anticipated, while simultaneously doing sort of battle with inflation over the next 6 to 8 years. So I'm not providing a lot of great, positive messaging. I think the issue is that the costs are definitely up. And so the strategy really becomes, I think, for the city in why we want to look at these over the next couple of years, as well as, how much more can we get out of our existing investment? How do we meet our regulatory requirements that are really what's driving the issues around the water treatment plant? And and how do we, plan for those unexpected events, and so I think all that compounds and makes it a very complex conversation.
Yeah. And that's partly why I asked the question, was if it's today's cost, which is what you said. So 6 years from now or whenever I don't know, let's just say $70 million to do these two things. That means with 2 to 3%, if we're lucky, inflation, I don't know, an extra 2 million per year adder just for inflation, probably if we're lucky, right? I mean,
Right. And that, and that's the real issue, right? Is that when inflation is running at over 10 or 12%, right? It's hard to, particularly for these kinds of costs, capital costs. I mean, I would actually say that capital costs are significantly higher than that on an inflationary basis in the last couple of years. But we know that odds are that's not going to continue to act in that fashion. I mean, we're already seeing some tampering of demand and some stabilization, I think. And so I think that's why we're being optimistic but cautious in approach to saying, is there a way that we can get this done at less expense? It may be different strategies to how we approach that, whether it's phasing or reductions in scope or scale of some of the work, or changes in process, as well as understanding that that kind of heavy inflation really doesn't seem to be something that's probably sustainable over the long term. So hopefully that normalizes.
thank you.
And Lance, so has the council made a decision at this point in time to pause on the treatment plant? Or is that coming at that decision coming later in November or December or something?
Yeah, there is a plan to have the project consultant do a presentation, I think in November at the upcoming council meeting. But my understanding is the general consensus is that the water treatment plant project is paused, put on hold, tried to delay out that 6 to 8 year time frame. There's some other issues compounding. You can't just kick that can forever. There's physical pieces that are that will and are starting to sort of fail. So it sort of becomes a two-stage approach of saying, okay, well, what do we need to do at the water treatment plant to meet our regulatory requirements? What is that sort of bare minimum cost in capital investment there to basically cover the open reservoir and process areas where there's access to sort of migratory birds and different animals or whatever that could get to that area and meet that current regulatory requirement, but also strategize on how to not only do that covering, but also how to sort of look and re-engage on what is really needed at the water treatment plant, and how we do that. Some sort of we haven't fully vetted any of these options yet, but just to share with the group, I mean, we're talking about reducing scale, changing some of the process, to be a different type of capital expenditure, which could reduce capital, but maybe slightly increase O&M costs. And also looking at location. One of the big challenges that I think has been uncovered with the water treatment plant location is that entire site is really susceptible to liquefiable soils and earthquakes. Odds are that existing plant will slide if there is a significant earthquake, particularly in the winter. So it's, one of those things where you don't miss drinking water until you don't have it, right? So and unfortunately you can't just turn it back on at the plant level if something catastrophic happens. So we're sort of contemplating, how do we deal with that? Can we possibly relocate to a different location or and save that capital cost of ground improvement, or does it make more sense to do the ground improvement as planned? Can we shrink the amount of ground improvement and shrink the size of the plant and scale the plant more vertically instead of horizontally? So all of those things become factors in how we proceed forward, which is, getting you guys a lot of detail, but also sort of giving you an insight into the engineering dynamics and the details involved in these costs and why we see those pretty wide swings. Tom,
Ron, did you have a question? You had your hand up earlier. Maybe not.
He's on mute still, but
All right.
Who was that question for?
Oh, I was asking if Ron had a question. He had his hand up
Okay,
earlier.
yeah.
So Tom, do you still have a question?
No, I'm good.
Okay, there's a little button at the bottom that says lower hand. Lance answered my question. I did have a hand up, but he addressed the fact of land. The location of the proposed new plant is being reevaluated, which may potentially change costs, which I think was mentioned prior.
so Deb, you gonna continue with slides, or
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Actually, Derek.
Was there
has a
still
question.
I think there's still a question.
Can I go ahead?
Yeah.
Okay, thanks. So Lance, this may be outside the purview of what you're aware of, and maybe it's a bigger discussion somewhere else down the road, but the numbers, two questions really. The numbers that we're looking at, we originally started with and what we're getting now. We're working with a firm or someone is putting together these cost estimates and sharing them. We haven't gone out for an RFP or any sort of formalized request for bids on how much this would cost. It's more of an estimate by a consulting firm.
for the water treatment plant, the cost estimate is generated by a consultant engineering firm that we have on contract for the design of the water treatment plant. And then that was vetted by our construction firm. We have what's basically called a CM at risk or CMGC contractor that also reviews those based on their actual costs. So the water treatment plant numbers are pretty accurate, and then that's the 40 million is really based on the design, the full design that the consultant had worked on through to 30%. With city staff, and then the wastewater treatment improvements are really just inflationary estimates based on the master plan schedule, and wastewater improvements really focus, and I think are really speak to the the master plan and what was put together at the time that was done. It was recently updated, but not all parts of the master plan were updated with that update. So we've adjusted those costs based on inflationary items. So you'll see the wastewater improvements are very much more, I would say, fluid in costs, because those are really related to things like I&I and max flow at the water plant or wastewater plant. So I think there's some varying strategies there on how we minimize cost and maximize return with that. It may be a combination of things there. So that one's a little bit more questionable. The water plant though is definitely has been pretty well vetted.
Okay. And do you know, or does someone on this committee know, one of the things I'm seeing in various jurisdictions is as capital costs are rising and the burden locally is becoming insurmountable, either at the city or whatever the jurisdiction is. You know, you saw the transfer to Newberg Fire to TVF&R. There was a transfer in McMinnville to a similar for fire issues, all circulating around capital improvement issues and sort of, you know, the expense burden just exceeding what's doable. Is there any possibility, or has it been talked about and it's just not an option, that water treatment could be outsourced to Clean Water Services or another type of, I don't know, service provider in the area, rather than us rebuilding one that may slide off the hill in an earthquake?
I think that, you know, there is some there has been some conversations to that in the past. My understanding is that, you know, and I apologize, I'm new, so I'm sort of,
Sure.
I've been here a few months and sort of learning as I go, but pretty familiar with the area and the different providers in the area, including Clean Water Services. And you know, the issue isn't, I'd say the issue isn't so much, you know, operational costs, although that does play a factor for Newberg, because Newberg's sort of isolated from the rest of the region. You know, when you get huge economies of scale, obviously, with a place like Clean Water Services or something like that, where, you know, you're dealing with a much bigger customer base. The issue, I think, that has been sort of brought forward and looked at in those options is really the capital costs remain the same, whether you're sort of building your own plant and operating it, even if you had somebody else operate it for you, or if you're pipelining great distance to some other provider. They would still have to probably upsize their facility, so there'd still be a capital cost there, plus the cost of the pipeline to get to them. So those costs, and again, because of Newberg's location and distance, whether it's from McMinnville or from Sherwood, those are big capital expenditures as well. So you're really not there. Those are actually more expensive than the options that we're currently considering.
Okay. We will move along then. Thanks, Lance. And of course, Lance will be around for the meeting, so if anybody has additional questions, holler. Okay, we're gonna launch into the sewer rate design and also, you know, just touch on again the overall rate increase options. We'd like to be able to at the next meeting move on to stormwater. So if we can close out conversations about water and wastewater tonight, understanding that you'll have an opportunity as you prep for the town hall stuff to come back and, you know, talk about all of the systems holistically, but in terms of detailed presentation and issues, hoping to wrap up water and sewer tonight. We are collecting some information on other community rates and have collected some of that, but in, you know, this question that you asked about, you know, Clean Water Services and looking at other regional sort of providers is, we want to be really thoughtful about who we are comparing to, because for some of those factors of, it happens that there are a lot of communities that we've compared Newberg to in the past who are served by regional systems for water and or wastewater, and in some cases both. And that does have an impact on the bottom line and those rates. So we're trying to incorporate some other cities into the comparison compared to what we've done in years past. So it's taken a little bit longer, but we'll have that, hopefully have some of that information at the next meeting. So, but we'll focus now on your rates and your rate structure. The sewer rates, as we've talked about a little bit before, include that, both the water and sewer rates include a fixed charge and a volume charge. And I think we talked a little bit about last time that this, the volume charge is structured a little bit different, or the fixed charge is structured a little differently from multifamily, in that there's an additional cost per unit. Everybody pays the same account service charge because that includes the billing and other sort of fixed costs, as well as a portion of the infiltration inflow costs, management costs that Lance was talking about. So then the volume charge varies by customer class and differentiates between domestic wastewater and higher strength wastewater for commercial customers like restaurants and car washes and things like that. And then there was a question about the outside city surcharge at the last meeting. When one of the pieces of information here is that the outside city, there are only 12 accounts. At this point, we don't have any information on why that rate doesn't have a surcharge on it while the water does. Only to say, though, that water has substantially more customers who are outside the city. And so, if it's something that the committee wants to recommend additional consideration of, you can certainly make that recommendation.
Yeah, I got a question. I would like to raise those outside city rates. I'm in an area of town down near Friends Park where there's an unusual unincorporated island in Newberg below Pioneer and Friends Cemetery. If any of you are familiar with it, there's about 12 acres, was just bought by a developer, and it's not within the city, which means it's actually county land, which means that they will still be paying the same as the residents in the city that we're providing for. So I feel we should raise the outside city rate for volume charge to the same as, I believe it was industrial that we had on the previous slide. But again, I'm not sure how others feel about it, but I think we need to, like commercial 2 and industrial, raise it up to those two, because we're providing for the city, and it seems like outside the city is, causing us extra effort. But I'm willing to hear what others think about that.
Is there anybody that's opposed to looking into that? Oh, looks like Derek.
Yeah, so this land, if it's going to be developed, would we
Yeah.
anticipate that it would likely have to be annexed into the city though at that point?
I don't know. The way it's looking, it's a 5-acre plot that was just sold. It's county land, and I don't know how they're going to proceed, if they're going to request that the city annex it or not. But it's really unusual that it's an actual island. It's surrounded by city land. It's just north of the bypass and just east of Winooski.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, typically in these cases, all of that stuff would generally get annexed into town. But if this is and maybe this is a better question for planning in general, but
Yeah.
in that case, if we would allow that developer to connect into the infrastructure of the city. That's why I'm generally asking why it's annexed, because in those cases, like for example, the properties that have gone in just north of the hospital, for those who've been around for quite a while, we annexed that in, I want to say, the early part of the decade in the 2010. So
Yeah.
yeah, so yeah, I guess that's probably a better question for planning though. But I was looking at the water comparison. We actually dropped by 60 accounts. We have 83 accounts. It looks like within our most recent or our current fiscal year that are outside of the city. So coming from 140 back in 2008, 2009.
Mhm.
Yeah, I saw that.
So, I mean, I would anticipate that we're not like, I don't think there's a large swath of customers who are, you know, are somehow getting around paying sewer and
True.
water rates by being on the outskirts of town. But I mean,
I'm
it's
just-
something, I guess, something for consideration though.
I'm just wondering if we should, again, this is for future requests outside the city, that might want to connect into the existing infrastructure. And I'm just saying, I think we should set the stage and raise it some. The water rates are higher for outside city, but the sewer rates are the same.
Okay, great. Is there anything else on that issue? Okay. Okay, so yeah, we did include this information about the historical look back at about 15 years ago at the volumes and the counts. I found it quite interesting to see, I had to double check my numbers to make sure that those totals on the volume really were basically the same over the 15 years, even though you've grown significantly in terms of the number of accounts. It's, I guess shouldn't be all that surprising to me, because I've watched as consumption has declined on a average per customer basis. But to see the numbers like that over a 15-year period, that was pretty interesting. So yeah, conservation is a thing, it's happening. And really it has resulted in delays in expansion of capital improvements over the longer term. So, conservation is a good thing over the long term. It does allow you to put off, some of that expansion, as well as addressing things like infiltration and inflow, as Lance said. But it also impacts revenue recovery, because a big portion of the revenue comes from the volume charges. So it's always a balance in terms of, how we forecast and how much we recover in terms of the rate structure through the fixed charges versus the volume charges. Because from on a yearly basis, the costs don't change really if consumption is less. There are some variable costs, but most of the costs of the utility are fixed. So just keep that in mind. But interesting numbers anyway. So when we let's see, Derek and Ned, you still both have your hands up, but I think those are old.
No, mine's new actually.
Okay.
So in terms of the scope of the treatment plant, did we consider the 20% decrease in volume rates as a part of that? Because from it's not a year-over-year perspective, but from a period-over-period perspective, we saw a drop, like for example, in residential rates by 19.7%. Did we take that into an account for the scope of the size of the projects we're looking that we are assuming in the future as well?
So the master plans, Lance, maybe you can help me out here. Though knowing your still coming up to speed as well, but I think the water master plan was done, what, 2018, 2019 or something. So, I mean, both the sewer, and maybe I think the sewer was done around the same time or more
I think it was
recently.
2016.
I mean, they've definitely been updated within the last 5 years, so they would have already kind of captured that trend as well, I would think.
Yeah, I would agree with that. But I'd also really hang heavy on what Deb had said earlier, is that a lot of those costs and those operations are fixed. You have fixed debt service, you have rising operational costs over time with personnel costs and materials costs. So, it's really a balance, because you want to sort of obviously defer major capital expenditures like expansion of the plant as much as possible, which conservation can help encourage. Those would typically be debt service payment type of expenditures. But you also have to understand too that there's always rising costs, because the base cost is the personnel services, the materials, the electricity, all of those things go up every year. And so I think the other thing to remember too, and one thing that I tend to remind people, is Newberg, in comparison to some other communities, Newberg also maintains, particularly on the sewer side, all of not only the public pipelines, but also the individual laterals to each individual house. So like where I used to work in the Portland metro area, that was the responsibility of the adjacent property owner, even the part of the line that goes out into the street all the way until it connects to the public line. And Newberg, several years ago, they made the decision to say that everything in the public right of way is the responsibility of the city of Newberg. So, and the public covers that. And so that's, when you're talking about aging infrastructure, over half the city's infrastructure is old clay and old concrete pipes, and all of the sort of various old types of materials used in those old laterals. I mean, all of that is expensive. It's really expensive to dig up the street, put in a new service lateral, all that. And so you have that sort of fixed cost that you're incurring. So all those things contribute to why, even if you're not seeing an increase in overall flow or volume, your costs are rising over time.
Okay, thanks. And that issue about, I wasn't even aware about that issue with the sewer laterals. And it just makes me think again to the community comparison and how difficult it is to find apples to apples comparisons, because that is a huge cost that is a factor in your rates that in a lot of other systems is not. So that's interesting. Okay.
Yeah, and to chime in on that too, Deb, a lot of communities also in their water and sewer in particular sometimes will incur general obligation debt, which goes on your property tax bill and not in your rate. So if you're trying to factor in like long-term financing costs, it gets even more sticky, when you're trying to compare one community to another. Or if another community is getting revenue from a different source, then other than rates, like timber sales or something like that, like that factors into that cost too. So your rates can change a lot there too. I know the community I used to work in, we got pretty substantial revenue from just cellular providers on our water tower, and so that helped defer and keep costs low on a rate basis. So a lot of factors go into each community's rates.
Well, hopefully you're gonna have good revenue, or maybe hopefully not, hopefully, I don't know, good news, bad news, if you get a lot of speeding people through Newberg, and your new red light cameras generate some revenue for the water system. Okay, back to the cost of service. So when we as we've developed the rate structure, and one of the charges of the committee and this process every other year is to not only look at the overall rate increase, but how to allocate that to the fixed and the volume components, and across the customer classes. And there are manuals on this topic that in the water industry, wastewater industry, that outline a process that we call cost of service analysis that involves lots of spreadsheets that take the costs and distribute those to different buckets that we call functions and service characteristics. And that helps to then evaluate the rate structure and the equity within the current rates. And so it just helps to understand, what's driving, what components of the costs and relative to each other and things like that. So it's the same process for water and wastewater. The functions and the services provided are somewhat different. In terms of sewer, you've got, the collection, and then some pumping involved, treatment, obviously, and solids is a component we look at separately because of the fact that some customers have that higher strength wastewater. And so we want to make sure those solids costs are being allocated appropriately. And then kind of just the customer and administration. So the service characteristics then are just the average flow volume. And then there's that wet weather flow component, which is a significant cost component, and that's why it's called out separately. And under industry practice and older, EPA guidelines for communities that received funding assistance for treatment plants when that was a thing back in the 70s or early 80s, that infiltration inflow costs are allocated generally by some combination of customer flow and accounts or units, equivalent units, and that relates back to that multifamily charge, because infiltration inflow is kind of an indirect cost of having the wastewater system. There's just flow that gets in there, and the city has to deal with it, build capacity for it, and treat it and all of that. And so that's a unique characteristic of the wastewater systems, not unique to Newberg, but certainly more of an issue in this part of the state and country. I do work in Bend too, not so much of an issue there because climate and soils and things are different. So in any event, it's a significant cost component. So we put and understand that this framework is about trying to make the rates more equitable, but also to consider the financial sustainability of the system, and practically speaking, there's only so many things we can monitor and then charge based on, and those are things like flow and number of accounts or dwelling units, and making some estimates of the strength contribution of different customer types. So it's always a balancing act. There's art and science that's involved in rate design. And so we go through that process, we allocate on all these spreadsheets, the cost out to customer classes and ultimately to the different rate components. So just to give you a sense of how the costs align with the different functions, you've got, collection and pumping is kind of about a third, treatment, and, if you include sludge and the reuse and all of that, that's another third. And then you've got, or actually that's probably a little more than a third. And then you've got a component, 25% or so, that's general and administration. But that includes things like engineering too. It's not just like overhead costs. It's some costs that are supportive of the system, but it's also the indirect costs of the city, HR and finance and other planning kind of departments. Then when we look at the service characteristics, so then we take the cost by those different functions. Collection is all about flow. Treatment is got a flow component because some unit processes are designed to accommodate the peak flow. Others, like the sludge handling things, are more about dealing with solids or the concentration, the loadings that are included in the wastewater. And so we then make some estimates, and that infiltration and inflow volume we estimate based on the total flows that are coming into the plant and that which we can attribute to customers. And the difference is the infiltration and inflow, which you can see is a sizable quantity, about 40%. So I know that Sarah said the city has had some success in its I&I mitigation efforts, and that number is trending down, but it takes a while to address those issues. And as the system ages, you fix one problem and then you got a problem somewhere else. So it's an ongoing thing to manage in our region. So the way that we have aligned the costs with the rate components historically, and this is again following industry practice, is billing fixed charges are recovered through the service charge, that monthly service charge that's charged the same for each type of account, because just because you're a commercial customer, it costs the same to send you a bill as a house. There's really not a significant difference there. The infiltration and inflow costs are recovered based on those are split between the fixed charge and the volume charge. 80% is recovered through the that kind of fixed component, and 20% is included in the volume component. And then that volume charge recovers pretty much everything else associated with plant operations, engineering, maintenance, and capital costs. Yeah,
I have a mechanical question.
Sure.
So on a customer's water bill, whether it's multifamily or residence, there's one fixed charge. So is that basically broken into these two components, billing and I&I, or am I missing something in the logic there?
Are you talking about the bill that you get when you look at it and you're saying that there's one line that's a fixed charge?
Correct.
Yeah, Katie, maybe you can answer that. I think as I recall, there were some changes made to the bills, how the bill looks since prior years. Is that right?
Yeah, just from our new software, but all of the mechanisms are still the same. So yeah, we do assess a fixed charge, which I think does incorporate all of these things on it.
Okay. So the fixed charge then includes both components here, is what it sounds like, right?
I believe so.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good, thanks.
Eric?
Thanks, Deb. And my question is about, you've mentioned in various times that, there's models, there's sort of industry standards, and there's models around how you do this. Um, is there anything about ours that is so far off to one side of the model pendulum? Are we sort of, using the best of, all the pieces and we lie somewhere in the middle, more traditional, more standard? Or is this model we use somewhat atypical?
Oh, no, I think it's, well, one thing I'll say is that Newberg was one of the first communities in Oregon to go to that strength-based wastewater charges for non-residential customers, which is that, those higher charges for restaurants and things like that. Dundee did that after Newberg did, and McMinnville did it after Dundee did it, so Newberg was actually, I think, on the forefront of that, and that's a real equity issue in terms of, that helps take pressure off the rates of residential ratepayers, and small businesses that don't contribute, significant wastewater strength components. So that's one thing. The other area is that just around how you allocate infiltration and inflow costs. And absolutely, so the percentage that's recovered from the variable versus the fixed charge varies. I think in Salem, where I work also, it's about 2/3 of the costs are recovered through the fix and 1/3 from the other. In some cases, it's 50-50. In some cases, it's 100% one or the other. So that's an area where it kind of differs just based on the, community objectives and characteristics. So again, but again, the practice is standard. It's just that some of the individual details vary. So I think that I think it's standard, and in some cases has been innovative at times, but now it's much more common practice to have that differentiation by customer class. Does that help?
It does. Thank you.
Okay, great. All right, so you'll notice that the 4% did not go away when we talked last time, and I was presenting to you a 3.5% option and a 4% option, and we were hoping that with the 3.5% option that could be the staff consultant recommendation, but Lance, being the bearer of bad news that he has been in terms of some of those costs, I think we had a meeting after our last rate review meeting, and really just looking at what you have ahead of you and the benefits of having reserves in the long term to help stabilize and rates and minimize rate spikes because of having to address a short-term need and have something happen like inflation getting out of control, or hopefully we won't have some sort of emergency situation where there is some sort of need to do a large scale improvement that wasn't anticipated. But in any event, the intention of this table is to show you that relatively small, in this case 0.5% increments of rate increases over the next 2 years can make a sizable difference over the long term. It's kind of like invest a little bit each year, and the compounding effect of that, when your investments are doing well, it's, putting a little bit away in the bank each year to help to be in a better position down the road to deal with some of what we know is coming. We just don't know exactly when and how much it'll be at that point in time. But we know that these are large capital projects that are needed. So 4% is on the table, and it is, I'd say, it's definitely the recommendation of your financial consultant, who has to be, looking at the city's best interest from the financial integrity of the system, and but certainly is on the table for discussion of the committee as we go forward here. So each additional 0.5% rate increase, based on, the assumption, the continued trend in terms of consumption and customer growth and stuff, is anticipated to increase the reserve by $1.5 million collectively over this period of time between now and 2031, which is when kind of my model runs out on the timeline.
Deb, I got a question.
Yeah.
In the last rate cycle we had 2 years ago, just to bring people up to speed, when we were first considering the water treatment plant, at that time, it was a comparison that we presented to the city council. The estimate back then was $12 million in seismic upgrades and other state compliance requirements for the existing facility versus $16 million for a new water treatment plant. Again, that was the initial estimate. And when we presented that to the city council, they said, well, 12 million for the existing, just up 4 million more for the new water treatment plant. Let's go with the new plant. Now that we're not doing the new plant, obviously, because the costs are much higher, is that $12 million in here anywhere? Because that's going to have to happen in seismic upgrades, et cetera, while we're not building a new plant.
Well, and I think that's what Lance and his team are going to figure out here, about what to put off that plant, what is going to need to be done in the short term.
Right.
And I don't, Lance, is it too soon to provide it, any sort of estimate on that? And if so, when do you think that will be?
Yeah, that's, we are reaching back out to the state and our regulatory requirements to see, okay, what is sort of this minimum cost to just put on, just to do the regulatory required covers, and then think longer term about best options for the plant over a long term. We could always, I think there's ways to work it to where, maybe we could get covers on, but not meet the seismic needs, and sort of minimize that initial cost while we think about, do we stick with what we have, or do we build new, and where? Now that we know more, quite honestly, than you did when you did the last rate review, about the sort of liquefiable soils of the area and rising costs overall of pretty much any and all options. So I think those are all very dynamic conversations, but at a minimum, yes, the costs aren't going down, they're certainly going up. So the question becomes, when, more so. And I think it's a smart choice realistically back then to really think about a new plant when you had those kinds of options. And I've been out there a few times now talking to the operators, and there are some substantial costs that are going to come up. The liner of the existing iron storage pond is in the next 10 years is going to need work. There's concrete basins that are original to the plant that are nearing the end of their useful life. And so, there's a lot of other factors at play. And so it's really just trying to, find the best way and the most cost-effective way forward.
Yeah, and if you'll notice, this table is for wastewater, or sewer, as we also call it. And what's unique about this table compared to water is this sizable SDC fund balance that you currently have. And that is not anticipated to that's not impacted by the rate increases. That's only impacted by what happens with SDC revenue and growth. But there was some discussion about, well, maybe that some of that could be used to pay down some of the existing debt service. But I think that with the situation, the uncertainty right now around those potential additional expansion of treatment plant, that money can be used to fund any sorts of expansion type because it's related to growth. And so that's a wonderful thing that you have that money in there. It's just a question of what additional funds will be needed, and not everything not all of the large scale improvements are SDC eligible. So there will need to be that additional money coming from rates. So, but the SDC balance is way more robust for sewer than it is for water right now. Though council did take some action to, I think, recently increase the SDCs for water. But it didn't have the full, since the plant costs have been evolving, there may still need to be some consideration about an adjustment later to fully capture that cost. Okay, so running with the 4% increase through the cost of service analysis to see just, how would the distribution of the revenue change with if modifying the rates and also this change to the rate structure. It's pretty stable, not a large just kind of minor tweaks here and there. And that's generally been the case because you do this every couple of years is a great thing. I work with cities who don't do this for 5 or 10 years or more. And guess what? Things change over that period of time. And it can be a really painful process to go through of, well, the residential rates, now they have to go up, 10%, and somebody else only goes up 3% or something. That's not the situation here. So again, in terms of where you are, how you fit in with the industry standards, you're above the curve in terms of your practice of looking at this on a regular basis. So just a little bit of shift, and the shifting comes from the slight reduction actually in the fixed charge, and it is that I&I component. So you can see here that the particularly for multifamily, because they pay a big part of their fixed charge is that that additional unit charge for infiltration and inflow, that goes down slightly in the first year. So the way we've kind of done this in the past is the rate review makes 2-year rate increase recommendations. Part of that recommendation is just what's the overall revenue increase, and then the other part is, and here is the rate schedule that accompanies that overall increase. And so under the cost of service model, you see there's if you're thinking relative, the system-wide increase is 4%, You've got volume charges that are going up more than 4%. That's because the fixed component is going down slightly less than 4%. So it all balances out to the 4%. It's just you've got the components going up at different different percentage increases. Ned, was that a new hand?
Yeah,
or an old hand?
just a clarification. Could
Yeah.
you explain again why the rates would go down slightly next year? I don't quite follow that.
Well,
then
again,
after-
it's just, yeah, it's just, you've got a certain amount of money to recover. And all this is saying is when we load in so we look at capital costs and we allocate those based on the plant investment that the current assets and also what the type of things that are planned. We look at, how operating costs align with those functions and service characteristics. When we do all of that, and if we continue to align the same functions with the same service characteristics, etc., there's always a little bit of shifting. It's never just okay, it's 4% across the board. It's, well, volume rates go up a little more, fixed charges go up less. And in fact, in this case, it's less such that if one were to just say, okay, fine, go with the cost of service next year, then you would see actually some reductions to some of the components. Now, you could say, well, no, it doesn't make sense to reduce the rates then to just increase in the next rate, just hold them flat. Just don't increase them. That's perfectly fine too. This is just more to illustrate what the model is saying in terms of how the rate increase is distributed across the different components. It's a, it's kind of a benchmark, and then they're still certainly within the purview of the committee, the city. There's nothing that says you have to charge based on cost of service, for one thing. And it can be used as kind of okay, well, maybe we've gotten to the point where, we've raised the fixed charge sufficiently, and maybe we just, for the future rate, the next rate increase, we raise the volume charge a little more, we hold the fixed charge constant, whatever it is. So something to consider. So this is just, based on that schedule I just showed you, there would be this reduction in the percent of revenue that is recovered from fixed. And this is something we pay very close attention to because it has helped the city be able to, again, it's all about revenue stability. And think back to the 15-year comparison and how consumption has declined so significantly. The fact that slightly more than a third of the costs have come from the fixed charges. It means as you add customers, you are adding a net benefit increase to the system that's helping to offset that reduction due to the volume per account decreasing. So it's definitely something I would not recommend going below 35%. The typical range these days is 30 to 40%. So you're in that sweet spot. Could you go off, back off a couple percent? Sure. That's what, this is showing us is certainly possible. But you could also say, we like, that kind of revenue stability. And let's not decrease it. That's all within the policy kind of purview of the committee in the city. This shows you the bill impacts associated with that rate schedule. And you'll see then that's why multifamily, for example, when you look at the percentage change, again, overall 4% for the system as a whole, but different percentage increases for different these are sample customers within each class. It's kind of the average. So like right now, the single family average customer during the winter months, that's what your sewer bill is based on, is charged the winter average, and it's between 400 and 500 cubic feet. You know, when I started doing this work, it was like 700-800 cubic feet. And multifamily, you know, again, these are just kind of averages, average usage profiles within each customer class. And then for the multifamily unit or example, it's based on 12 units within the multifamily structure. So in any event, you can see the percentage increases. So the highest increase would be for the commercial 2 category, but also, you know, basically commercial going up more than the residential if you were to back off slightly on that fixed charge. That's what's driving this distribution of impacts. So we can discuss this, or I can move on and do the water, and then we can kind of talk about it all holistically. Is there a preference, Chair?
I do have one last question, a kind of a bottom line question, in that after I think we used to have 3.5% increase, so you're now recommending we go up to 4%, right?
You know, I'm always going to be straight with you guys and very transparent about what you know, what you're looking at. And yeah, so the examples I could have shown you, here's all the tables with 3.5% here, you know, this is just for illustration based on the 4%. If you tell Katie and Lance, you know, we want to see the 3.5%, that's what we want for the town hall or whatever it is, that's what, you know, we're looking to you all to provide your recommendation. And then that's what we will bring back for the final consideration. But for purposes of tonight, here's the rates with the 4%, since, you know, I wanted to show you kind of the worst case, and then you can decide if that's palatable, or if you would like something else, or if you want them both, you know, for consideration at the town hall, that's fine too. We could certainly do that. So, you know, there's kind of 2 decision points. One is overall percentage increase, and, you know, do you want that across the board, or does it make sense to, you know, follow kind of the past practice of making some modifications to the rate structure? You know, those are that's the kind of feedback that will be helpful tonight, or if you need additional information. So, but again, we can talk about that after I go through water if you want, or we can pause and have the sewer discussion completed.
Is there a preference? If not, I'm gonna let you keep on going.
Okay.
Any transition to
There's
water?
one question,
Oh.
one raised hand.
Yeah. So one thing that would be helpful for me to understand is, because we're talking about water, and then or storm or wastewater, and then we'll talk about the various other aspects of this. Is there any way for us to see this in aggregate, to see like if we go 4% here or 3%, like it's to be able to see what the impact of that would be? And I think the other thing that would be helpful for me to understand is understanding what dollar amount is coming from fixed rate charges and what dollar amount is coming from variable rate charges as well. And I understand that, you know, the fixed rate really only applies to single and multifamily associated with that, just to understand like what levers are at play, and really, if we wanted to make adjustments in various areas, how that would impact the overall for each segment type of that the city serves.
So the service charge does apply to everybody.
Oh, it does, okay.
Yeah, it's just that multifamily, because so each account gets a service charge, and then for each unit over and above, beyond the first unit, it gets this additional charge.
Got it.
And so, yeah.
So in the multifamily example, I think you had 12 units in there.
Right.
The first would pay $33, and then each incremental would pay
Yes.
the reduced amount. But so, for
Exactly.
example, a commercial customer would pay a fixed rate as well.
Absolutely.
okay,
Yeah,
all right.
they would pay that 33 bucks
Okay.
a month. Yeah, for
Yeah,
sure.
I think just even having the split out would be helpful. And realistically, if we take a look at the number of accounts and volume, most of this is being driven by single family homes anyway.
Yes.
But just to be able to see what those incremental changes would be from both a fixed and a variable rate, I think would be helpful. And I would be interested in, I don't know how in depth we want to get with this, but like a distribution of volume by customers, if there's something that we had something similar to that. So I like commercial 2 includes mini markets, car washes, and those two customers could ultimately have far different usage rates. So just understanding what the distribution of volume looks like across customers, I think would be insightful. I don't know if we're looking at variable rates potentially, and I don't know how complicated we want to get with this, but if we wanted to put like surge pricing associated with rate usage for different customers, potentially what sort of impact that might look like as well.
So when you say, so are you wanting to see the well, so we've got the revenue.
So there's a couple requests here. So I'd like to be able to see the fixed and variable rate. So to be able to split that out, so you could see like
different from these rates.
Well, so in aggregate, right? So when we take a look, and if you go to, let me find which slide specifically discusses the 4% increase, which is on slide 15, to be able to split that out into service charge, and which is a fixed rate, and then variable rate based upon monthly usage, I think would be helpful. And then the second request in there was really more along the lines of distribution of usage within each customer segment, to understand if we wanted to go down the route. And I think that's probably more indicative of when we get to water rates themselves. But I think it may apply to most of these categories, to be able to see, like, do we have in certain customers like a lot of low volume usage customers, to understand, if we wanted to use variable rate pricing as an example, and not just raise 4%, but maybe raise 3%, and then anything above 60% usage from a distribution perspective, we tack on like a 20%, like, again, trying to induce conservation of usage, just to kind of understand what, and I don't even know if we have the ability to do some of that, but just to try to understand what the full volume, as opposed to an average here, because there could be, I would imagine, like I said, in commercial 2, we have, customers who are mini marts who are not using, I can't imagine a whole lot of volume, and this kind of gives, next to the Dutch Brothers, we have the mini mart right next to it, and the car wash. And I'm guessing that those two customers use far different distributions of overall volume of water associated with those, just to kind of understand, because you could put an average number in there, but it could be right skewing or left skewing potentially, to understand customers who may pay more or less based upon that. But then also with the availability of, if we want to discuss variable rate pricing based upon volume usage.
Yeah, and we can certainly talk about that with water. I think part of we'll have to find, Katie will need to find out from the billing system folks what information is available in terms of standard reports that could be generated. For this analysis, we just get information at a class level, not at a customer level. I don't know what's doable, but we can certainly look into that. And as soon as we transition here to water and talk about the rate design issue, we can talk more about conceptually about the other rate designs. Okay, was there anything else on wastewater before we go on? Okay. All right, so what time is it? I don't have just keep my eye here on how we're doing on time. Okay, water rates. Similar kind of thing of fixed and volume rates by class. Here we have the billing charge and the meter charge. And again, these do apply to all of these customer classes. But here it's based on your meter size. So you pay more for the larger meter sizes, and the billing component is pretty minimal. Go through the same process. We've got different functions, different service characteristics. So instead of worrying about wastewater strength and volume, we're worried about that peak use, like you were saying. Just who's driving the increase in demands during the summer season when, because that's how a sizing criteria and does drive some of the whatever, variable costs there are in the system in terms of some of the additional electrical and other kind of cost increases. So here's the distribution to the service components. And so here, you've got your supply and treatment, so water production and water, then we get into, the storage, the transmission, getting it to customers. So it's sewer, it's kind of the reverse, taking water away, treating it. Here it's supply, delivering it to you.
I got a
Yeah.
simple mechanical question.
Yeah.
What's the difference between transmission and distribution?
That is the size of the line, the water main. So I think, but we don't have the ability with the data to really make, I can't tell you for certain that, that the transmission, we've been able to accurately capture that differential. In fact, I think we probably are underestimating transmission costs relative to distribution, but we just don't have the ability within the fixed asset records. We could do a GIS probably analysis to determine the replacement costs associated with different lines of different sizes, but generally it's like 16-inch in diameter water mains and above are considered transmission.
Okay.
And the smaller lines. From a rate design standpoint, it doesn't really matter because it's all about delivering water. And we look at it kind of the same way. Although there is part of the distribution system is building capacity for fire flow needs. And so and Lance can correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think the transmission system is more about sizing for the potable water delivery. So, but the fire relates in part to this readiness to serve, and that would include sort of readiness to serve in an emergency, as well as just, this component has become a more significant factor for the same reasons I talked about with wastewater, of needing to have a significant enough portion of your revenue that's coming from a fixed charge, because of the high percentage of costs that are fixed in the system. So readiness to serve recovers things like the water meter costs, the base, a portion of base distribution costs, because, you know, the system has to be there and ready to serve you when you decide to turn on your tap. And if you decide to turn off your tap, it still has to be there and ready to serve you. So, you know, we cover, so it's been kind of a evolution in the water industry to kind of modify how we talk about this. It used to be, you know, you pay for what you use, and yes, that's true. And we also need you to pay even if you decide not to use, because there are costs that need to be covered. So a little bit just kind of from a fixed and variable cost considerations. So then we talk about here the base use being kind of that stable volume that's stable throughout the year. And then you've got this peak demand. And that's what drives a lot of the sizing of reservoirs and water lines, and the plant needs to be able to produce sufficient water to meet that peak demand. So just to give you some, you know, and again, not a big shift, you know, just little minimal. The base, this was on the left here, the base, peak, and readiness to serve RTS. This gives you the percentages from the 2 years ago, and when I've updated that, there's been a, you know, slight shift in terms of average demand costs, and then the peak demand costs 28%, readiness to serve 30%. So not much change, but that just is kind of a little bit of a one third with a little slice for billing. Now, understanding that peak versus average demand, and you know, it's a significant cost. So the last master plan, the peak demand to the average demand was basically 2 to 1. And so, you know, we've got a picture of the water treatment plant here, because the sizing of that plant, the number of, I don't know, filters or whatever the technology is, that go into this plant. Each plant's a little different. That is impacted by those peak demands. So that is what we try to recognize through the rates and establishing those different volume rates by customer class. So here you have 2 usage profiles just to highlight kind of your lowest and your highest peaking. Is you've got multifamily that tends to use water much more consistently throughout the year, and because there's generally less common areas and outdoor kind of usage. When you have irrigation customers, some of whom are, you know, multifamily kind of common areas or HOAs or school fields, parks, things like that, where irrigation is all about watering during the peak season. Was there a hand? Tom has a hand.
Yeah, two questions. One, and I think you were just starting to maybe get to it, was around how are HOAs, or what customer class does an HOA fall under?
Well, so it depends on if a you know,
Let's say it's for a single family group of houses.
Yeah, my guess is there's probably going to be served by a separate irrigation meter, but I don't you know, I don't know exactly, and it depends on, you know, if it's serving some sort of combined function or isolated as a irrigation only. And that distinction is important because irrigation meters don't pay sewer, right? Because if there's no return flow to the sewer system because it's all being outside, so there is sort of an incentive on the one hand that you don't pay wastewater, but you do pay a higher water rate per unit for that irrigation water. So
Okay,
my guess is, in my experience in other communities, is that a lot of those, a lot of the irrigation customer class meters are things like common areas of at housing, for housing, as well as fields and parks and things.
okay. My second question had to do with peak demand and whether or not you're aware of, is there anything like what exists around electricity usage
Mm.
for peak demand using like the Nest systems? And I know I do this where I let PG&E override my temperature controls in order to lessen the strain on the system. Is
Right.
there anything like that on the water side or that you're aware of?
No, the metering technology is not that sophisticated, and the interrelationship with the city's system. Yeah, we get, the alerts that say, yeah, if you don't turn on your air conditioning tonight, you can get a little rebate from your electricity bill. Not that dynamic here. The best at this point, but there have been advances in meter technology, and at some point maybe that will be the case. So as you can see from these charts, we look at monthly data. What you're talking about is really about around the peak hour.
Right.
It's like, and there is, peak hour is an issue in terms of, for some facilities, but generally, we just don't have that refined information to be able to give customers. We can give customers pricing signals by charging them higher rates per unit, but and that absolutely sends a price signal, and it's why we're seeing the reduction in usage, partly why we're seeing the reduction in usage that we're seeing, but yeah, not down to the hour of the day for sure.
Okay, thank you.
So speaking of reduction in usage, this is even more significant of a decline in impact than what we saw for sewer. Is not only have you had an increase in the number of accounts over the last 15 years, but this usage has actually declined. And so, not surprisingly, that you tend to see, more of there's more opportunity, I guess, for conservation with between indoor and outdoor uses. And so there's a lot of factors that have gone into it, and the rate increases, I'm sure, also play into it. People encourage, so we've got low flow fixtures and just better technology, conservation messaging, and then also price elasticity from the increases in the rates. So that's just to give you that information on the historical.
Yeah, and I would say on that too, Deb, that the current rate structure does encourage conservation significantly, because you do see far less irrigation than you have seen historically in the past. So
That's true. Yes.
People are conserving water, and back to the original, issue about, different meters at different times. You also have to remember, in electric systems, the peak is the peak, right? There's not going to be a boost above the peak. In water systems, you have the peak, but then you have essentially a major boost above peak that we provide for potential fire flow. So when we're sizing systems, we have to size not only for our usage, but also above and beyond that usage for major fires. And so there's, the fire component is a very significant component to any water system. We're really an integral part of firefighting service, because firefighters don't get much done if they don't have water. And so, always remember that a big part of any water system is fire flow.
Yeah, good. Yeah, so there is, yeah, significant conservation that has been happening. The components and how the costs align are similar as what we discussed with wastewater, but the difference where you had that I&I component of the fixed charge, the infiltration and inflow component, here it's that readiness to serve. And as Lance said, the costs associated with that firefighting capability is baked into that readiness to serve charge component. So that's how we make sure that there's that revenue stability component. And really that is not related to how much water you use. It's related to just, it's a community issue and benefit that cost gets distributed to everybody through the meter capacity charges. So you will pay more the larger your meter size is, which makes sense because, you know, if you have a larger business or something, you require greater fire protection as well. So there is a component of that relates to the use. So here's the same pitch on the impacts of the different rate increases on the ability to add to your reserves. Again, this is not money that needs to be spent in the next 2 years. We're not saying you need a 5% rate increase because of costs in the next 5 years. It's here's what a 5% rate increase would help to generate towards that water treatment plant project that keeps getting more expensive. And so here it's a 5, I'm not going to, mess around with 0.5% rate increase is because of the need is so significant. Here it's showing you the difference between 5% and 4%. The water revenue and the rates right now are relatively less than the sewer rates. That's why to generate about the same additional increment as sewer, you have to go a 1% differential, not a 0.5%. So it's just because we're dealing with a different base revenue amount. And that water infrastructure financing loan that the city had teed up for the plant requires a 49% match, which the city had when the plant was estimated at 20 some million. You do not have right now for a $40 million plant. So it's going to be imperative, unless, some other financing comes through. But again, having the reserves would help you with that as well. So this same kind of presentation here about how the percentage that here going with the 5%, sticking with showing you the higher number and working that through the rate schedules, how it would be distributed across the customer classes. And then you see that the percent goes up a little bit for irrigation. So there is kind of that those customers with higher what we see, and this is really something that does change every couple of years or so. We look at how are the usage patterns changing between the customer classes, and when a class, this is the class as a whole, is contributing more to that system peak, the cost of services increase their rates relative to the other customers. And so, this schedule here is a little more complex because you have more customer classes, you've got all those meter sizes. Here we have a little bit of the opposite as to with wastewater, a slightly higher increase in the fixed charge and a lower overall increase in the volume charge. No rates going down, just relative increases. And as I said, irrigation and industrial percentage increases are higher, and that reflects the peaking characteristics of those two customer classes since we last did the rate update. And I'm just going to jump to this, go quickly through this just because of the time, and want to have some time for discussion. Here, much more significant increase in the fixed charge over time, and that has been by design, with full support by the committee, those who had to work through when the city had 10% or less revenue coming from the fixed charges, and 1 year couldn't meet their debt service coverage requirements because revenue had kind of there had been a big reduction in revenue. So it's been a very deliberate process to get the water revenue recovery on a more stable footing. And again, could you go higher? Absolutely. And up to 40% is the range that we're seeing, but this still sends a very strong conservation message, as you can see in what people are, the reduction in usage that has been occurring, and this just inches it up just slightly more. So again, same kind of approach here of showing you the average within each class. So you can see that while in the winter months, the residential average is 400 cubic feet. In the summer, the average is 7. That's from all the, because most single family residential customers don't have separate irrigation meters. You see that irrigation impact in their bill, in their class use. So you compare the 5% system wide and how that gets distributed. Single family comes out right about 5%, multifamily a little bit higher, again because the fixed charge increases a little more. Industrial and irrigation because of the higher volume rates and the peaking factor issue. Okay, that's a lot of slides to get through. As I said, stormwater's up next. We'd like to, I can certainly bring back a little more information on the sample bills as was requested. We can find out what information is available. I'm going to go ahead and stop share. If anybody has any questions on the slides, I can always reshare it. But so we had as part of our discussion, Lance and Katie and I, since the last meeting, just talking about, the issue about conservation and the trade-offs between sending a higher, more punitive conservation signal and with the intent to have people reduce usage has a very detrimental impact on the revenue at a time when part of what you need to do is continue to increase revenue so you can pay for these improvements. It's not the situation for water. You're going to have to do this plant regardless of whether people cut back, because it's more about sliding off the hill or the issues related to seismic and aging infrastructure. So we could certainly still look at what information's available to give you some more idea about how volume, the distribution of volume within each class. I don't know that that's something that can be produced quickly, and I don't think for this rate cycle that coming up with some more complex conservation oriented rate structure is doable. But it's certainly, if the committee thinks that that is something that should be on the table for consideration at the next rate cycle or something, the recommendation could be made if that's something you would like to do. And then the city can prepare itself with gathering the information that's required to do that kind of analysis, which is significant. But again, having to understand that where you are right now, so conservation's happening, just by virtue of the fact that the rates are what they are and all the other factors. And it's happening at a rate that is sustainable in terms of it's not having a detrimental impact on the revenue. So we have to balance those two things. So with that, I'm gonna let you all discuss.
Well, I have one comment. I don't necessarily need to go first, but with this groundwater plant essentially out of reach, okay, reality check. I'm not sure I can justify going from a 4% water increase to a 5% water increase, chasing something that we're not going to be able to obtain. I think the only way we can get that water treatment plant is if there is some unforeseen possibility of a major state or federal grant. Okay, and no, you know, I don't know if anything's out there. I don't see how other towns are doing this because the costs are so high. So in the absence, because if we go 1% higher from 4% to 5%, the cost of that plant is going to increase more than that 1% extra that we're taking in by the time we even approach 49% minimum or whatever is required if we're going for some loan situation. So given that I don't think we can attain that, I don't know, I can't justify right now going from a 4% increase to a 5% increase when the rates are already pretty high. It's going to be hard to sell even higher percentage. And that's my 2 cents.
I had a couple of things, couple of thoughts. One is just an old quote that I remember from years ago. I'm not sure what to do with it, but it was a good plan executed today is better than a great plan executed tomorrow. I guess food for thought, you know, is there, and it kind of gets into Ned's comment, I think, a little bit, that it seems like as though we're trying to increase the rates, to increase the reserves, to chase after this plant that costs a heck of a lot of money sometime down the road. That's kind of like, feels like the great plan, which is tomorrow. Is there a good plan which costs less, that we don't have to chase as much, that we could do sooner? And I don't know the answer to that, but I think about that quote and whatever that means. The second one is, one thing to keep in mind is the Social Security COLA is 3.2%, which will be in place January of next year. So something to think about for those people who are on Social Security. I think I had a third one as well, but I can't remember at the moment. Oh, I know what it was. One thing, maybe going, if people compare things to other cities, I've been following a lot of the comments going on behind the scenes in Sherwood in particular, huge property tax increases there. I think due to the new high school that we don't have to deal with in Newberg, which is good. You know, they're getting property tax increases, double-digit percentages, whereas ours, I think for the most part, it's 3%. So even though that's an entirely different thing, you know, people look at their whole household budgets, and that's a huge thing that I know at least people in Sherwood and maybe Washington County are dealing with, that people in Newberg are not. So several different things, kind of different pluses and minuses to think about.
I would do the flip side. Small changes now give us, they're easier for our populace to deal with. If a 1% now, and it's a couple of years from now, and it builds up reserves, I think the wastewater and the water is approximately $5 million. Difference between the 4.5, 2.5, for the wastewater, 5%, 4% for water. That's $5 million more. And the question is, we don't know when we're going to push it down the road a little bit, and it's not going to be a 2-day or 2-year, 4-year, or maybe a 10-year, but having more cash reserves are going to be better. Things are only going to cost more as far as we can tell. The pandemic has done a significant cost of construction, period. It's shocking how high it is. And our systems haven't recovered yet. Small little bit now may give us more later, which is what Deb's data, from what I saw, it does. It may not be enough, but we're hopeful for some other facets. Is there going to be a loan or grant, I should say? Is there going to be a better land alternative? Is there going to be an alternative? Is it better scale? I would think a small increment today is going to be easier. What we did in the past, if you look at the rates, is we went off and we did 0, and then it came up almost 2x. It would have been easier to populace if we kept it steady state or just a slight increase, if that's what's needed. I'm not advocating, I don't like an increase. People are struggling 2 years ago to make the bills. So that's something to consider.
I agree with that statement, Ron. I mean, we're just gonna, I'm all for, I hate increasing it, but I'm all for doing maybe 4, even 5% so that we have those cash reserves and we're not, kicking that increase down the line, in terms of say kicking the bucket down the road a bit, just to have a 10%, 3 years from now and really hurt everybody's pockets.
I'll just say that's what I'm afraid of. I'm afraid of if we maintain our stealth right now, maybe not the next rate review, but the third one is going to be 2x, and I'm fearful of that because I think that's a scenario that potentially we could see.
Yeah, and I'm always forward thinking. So if we make it better for like the next generation that's going to be paying the bills and staying here, all the college all the George Fox students that choose to stay here and buy houses here, we want to be able to have some money in our reserves to have that water plant so that they can have water or clean pipes.
Any other thoughts from the other folks? I do
Yes.
appreciate. Yeah.
I'm just gonna add a little bit. I don't mind, an extra rate increase, but we have to communicate and explain it to the average ratepayer person why the rates are going up a little higher than they were. Basically, yes, it's a great idea for us to get more reserves, but it's like, okay, going into a savings account. If our customer paying the water bills, are they going to want to do it just for reserves? Now, if we say, well, this is saving up for needs of a water treatment plant down the road, if we communicate that, it'd be an easier pill for the average rate paying customer to swallow. Okay.
How do we communicate that? I mean, it doesn't come out on the bill. The only way I know that is here, right? It's captured in our minutes. It's going to be captured in the public forum when we go to the city council and present the rate proposal from our committee. I think that's the only place it's captured.
At one point,
I think,
there was,
yeah.
remember that PDF file last year or a year or before of all the capital projects? And also you can insert a statement or two on people's bills. There are different ways to get the word out. And I think we can do a better job of that when we come to our bottom lines. Okay.
Katie, do you finish your statement? I thought you were trying to say something.
Oh, yeah, Ned got it. I was just going to remind everybody on the flyer that we had on the capital projects.
Yeah.
More conversation. I don't want to truncate this. Derek?
Yeah. So
I'm Okay, well, wait, that's two Derek's.
Yeah, you can go double
All
arc.
right, all right. So, well, I guess I see pros and cons on both of these arguments, but I tend to lean towards, I'm not sure it's the right now approach for a later result to continue to add a band-aid when you need a tourniquet. I think it's alarming that the cost of this major capital improvement doubled from whenever the initial estimate till now. So that tells me that part of that is I think Ron mentioned the cost of construction increasing during the pandemic. That's 100% true. But rising labor, rising materials, that's not on the downward turn. And in the projected time frame we're talking about, I don't I think any economist or any otherwise would have trouble forecasting even a leveling off. So that to say, is it worth adding a little now to put into a smaller bucket that will, frankly, it's not going to be enough on the path we're on. We're hopeful that there might be some injection somewhere that helps mitigate our side of the expense equation. I don't know. I kind of feel like it's a tough pill for people to swallow right now. And I would be yeah, I would be concerned about exceeding increases that we've already established as the norm to create the stability. So I am a proponent of the stability. I think that is prudent and is a benefit to utility payers. The 4% increase that's been in place over that looked like a 10-year chart we looked at, that has created a reserve to create a stability fund. We're using that down, I understand. Paying back into that seems right. I don't know that I would get behind a minimal increase to support the cost of a capital project that seems that far out of reach. I think a bigger question is maybe it's time that this does become more public and we need to sort of create an awareness campaign around the gravity of this capital project. And, maybe we'll get more feedback in these meetings from the community or at town halls or something to say, we would support a large increase to get us there, or no, we want to see a geo bond, or no, we want to find something else. I don't know that our opinion, I should say, I don't know that our action being a small increase and keeping that just small increase ticking along when the other side of that expense equation, in terms of a revenue increase, and then the expense equation being probably at least a 5 to 10% increase in the expenses escalating. I that's a tough one. I'll have to kind of noodle on that one for a little while and see where we land. But I guess that goes to both Ned and Tom's comment and a little bit of Ron's. Not a perfect solution, but I don't know. That's where I'm at.
All right. And just in terms of continuation, ultimately the bill is going to come due for these projects in some form or fashion, whether it's through a 4% increase or a 3% increase or a 3.5% increase. This is kind of where I was getting to some points regarding, are there other mechanisms beyond some of the existing mechanisms that we have in play? And obviously we can't control things like red light cameras, which I know is very popular for me, but at some point the city's going to have to pay for this. And the way I'm leaning is if we have rates that are on par or even slightly higher than average or that we've had historically, I think more than anything else, that leaves us flexibility in the future. So if there are grants that arise that allow us to take advantage of that, we have cash on hand, or at least some sort of monetary mechanism to take advantage of those things. So I would err on the side of smaller increment, or so for larger incremental increases, so that as a resident in 10 years, I'm not getting asked to now have to pay, significantly more in terms of property taxes or things of that nature. And I know that obviously, with the everyone's taken a hit in the last several years as it relates to inflation. I just think it's a little bit easier to do it, as the old adage says, the easiest way to eat an elephant is one small bite at a time. And I think it's, even though paying $1 or $2 more per bill is challenging, I just think it's a little bit easier than for some people who are kind of skating by now having to deal with several $100s on their property taxes, as opposed to having to pay a couple dollars more per bill now. So that's kind of where I'm leaning. I think more than anything, it allows us for flexibility. None of us know kind of what's going to be ongoing as we kind of move forward, and maximum flexibility, I think, will offer us more advantages than having to go back each time. But with that being said, I do think that explaining this to our constituents and providing transparency as to why these increases are happening, whether it's at 3 or 4% or what have you, we need to let the community know exactly why and maybe it's not going to come due today, but it's going to come due at some point. So that's kind of where I'm sitting at on it. And yeah, so yeah, I'll pass it to the next person.
Any other thoughts from anybody else based upon those comments?
So this is Derek back to well, or maybe this is to everybody. So I guess I want to be mindful that
Well, you muted yourself.
oh, there we go. Sorry, this is just referring somewhat back to Derek, but to everybody also, is just to be mindful of. I'm where I should speak for myself. Where I'm at is I'm supportive of the status quo, which was stabilized increases already. So I don't think anybody's suggesting no increase, right? So where we're coming back to is we've been historically at a 3.5 or 4, and that has helped pad reserves. That has created a stability fund that has, kept us at what we thought was going to be on target. I'm not suggesting no increase. I'm suggesting that we should, if we're going to take that next step and say, well, for the last past years, it's been a 4% increase, and now we're going to jump it to 5, or we're going to go farther. I would need some rationale for that. I think the current state of why we were doing increases made sense. And if we're going to make the next jump to, well, a portion of the increase was to fund this capital project, and now that's doubled in cost, that conversation needs to be broader and not well, let's slide in an extra 1% here or there and hope that, softens the blow later. I think the blow's too big to avoid not being more transparent and getting some feedback as to the preferred method of the larger gap and how we're going to fund that.
Yeah, and so, as you were mentioning, Derek, the status quo, I think the realization as we went to price that project, we now know the status quo is not going to get us to where we want to go. So that would just be my argument towards potentially increasing that. And again, maybe it's not this 1% or this 0.5% or wherever we decide to go with this. Raising rates at any area, whether it's a school bond or a pool bond or whatever bond it is. And I'm not saying that's the only mechanism to kind of pull this stuff through, but the reason I'm looking at, why I think maybe adding a 0.5% or even 1%, does that matter? And all of this stuff with all due transparency to our community, if you look at any of our social media in town, water rates is probably the most divisive thing that kind of comes up, and I think it's because we all get kind of bit with those increases as it goes. But I am just of the nature that I would rather be slightly more aggressive now, which allows us for greater flexibility in the future. Because we couldn't have foreseen that $16 million balloons to $40 million. I would also maybe take that as, is 12 million 36 million, or is that change for renovations or seismic improvements?
Right.
Is that significantly less than the $40 million? Because that may be something that worth exploring at the time when you have a 20% increase of deconstructing our old system and putting a brand new one in. That certainly made sense. But if that $12 million is $20 million now, and I'm not saying it is, that may be an opportunity to reevaluate that decision now that we have different inputs going towards that as well. So
What I'm hearing is an AR or a request from Deb, Katie, and Lance. The first question seems to be, what is this going to be, this thing that we have to pay for, right? We got a $40 million price tag, and the question is, we pushed it out. How far can we push it out? Is it in 20 years from now we have to do it? There's some economic cost now finance things you can do to go off and guess what that is. It seems like we need to kind of start defining what is the problem statement, and then leverage Deb to go off and say, if you're going to do this, this is what you need. This is the glide path to be able to hit it. I think we need to define it today. I think it's too nebulous for us to go off and say, I'm going to give you a little bit more. We're going to do an increase today, but we don't know if it's going to hit it because we just don't know. Can we ask for Katie, Lance, and Deb to kind of take back and say, draw it in the sand? Best, it's going to be a guess, and any guess you're going to be wrong, but a better guess today is better than nothing. When do we need to do this? How much is it going to cost? Let's assume some good things. Let's assume that a different land use is actually that the city owns is going to be easier. Whatever. Is it going to be a new facility? Is it going to be a retrofitted facility? I think you need to put some boundaries on this, and then we get a glide path to that with our rates. Is the only thing that makes sense to me. Is that compromise? Because that's what I'm hearing is we just don't want to throw money into a bucket. We got to start defining. I think that if we define it today, it's going to change, but at least we have documentation of this rate drives this benefit to this project as we defined it. And as it changes, we can go off and do things.
And just to comment too, because I know it was brought up about seismic improvements to the existing plant. I don't think Lance was here for some of that, so maybe Lance will have a different opinion, but I think the public works director and the city manager did some studies, and I think that we discovered the capacity of the existing plant won't support the future growth we're expecting. So there could likely be some pipe bands coming up in like 5-7 years from now. So that was part of the reason why we felt that we needed a new plant, because it was going to have more capacity possibilities for there. And then another thing that we were thinking about was the existing plant has the soil issues that Lance had brought up. And so I think even with the seismic upgrades to it, it still could have that soil problem, which is something that we were trying to avoid with the new groundwater treatment plant. So I think those were both reasons why we were not looking at refurbishing the existing plant, and that was kind of off the table. But Lance might not have had that chance to evaluate that yet, so he might have a different opinion on some of that. But just to give the committee some background on that.
Right, and so, yeah, you've got a couple different things happening at the existing plant. You've got the issues around a lot of the components starting to, sort of come to the end of their age. So there's the investment in just replacing, you're replacing the tires, you're replacing everything on the vehicle, because you're rolling over the engine, right? And so there's some of those issues. There's the issues of the soil, there's the issues of the site, there's the issues of the capacity to meet future needs. So I think what I would say is, for the purposes of rate review today, our best guess is that the $40 million number is the number, and so that's what we're looking at now. Can that change? Certainly it can change. We've got options, we've got different ways to approach it. I mean, we could build something that meets our current production, and then size it to where it could grow in production. The new plant is a totally different style of plant that was being considered, and it's most cost-effective style, and it does allow for incremental growth much more easily than the current plant design. So so there's different, I think, ways to get there. You know, it is hard because we don't have, you know, that perfect crystal ball to say, this is the number, this is how you get there the easiest. We also don't know other options. I mean, there are some, you know, maybe there is a brick grant out there that helps defer, you know, fund part of that project. You know, maybe there's, you know, if there's not a palette for rate increases, maybe there's an opportunity for property tax bond. You know, maybe the state legislature. I mean, I know other communities that have gone and gotten lottery money to help defer some of these base capital improvements in their communities. So, you know, those kinds of things require time. They require a lot of legwork. They require a lot of politicking to get to some of those outcomes, and that is a heavy lift sometimes as well. So I think you just, you know, the purpose, you know, and really part of this rate review is you guys have this difficult task of sort of forecasting and trying to smooth those bumps, knowing current inflation rates, knowing current issues. I think, you know, it certainly, you know, makes sense to do a little bit more, to get a little bit more, and then once we have more information and more detail over the next couple of years, come back in a couple of years and then review it again, you know, and see, you know, can we flatten this? Did we get a grant? Do we get some other opportunity? Or is everything just, you know, going sideways in the world and it's now even more expensive, right? You know, because, you know, who knows what's going to happen? You know, are we going to have another COVID? Are we going through a war? Is the price of steel going to quadruple? You know, like, those things are really hard and if not impossible to predict. And we just take the best, you know, decisions that we have with the information that we have. And so
I want to clarify, because I get it. It's challenging what we're asking. You've got to define it by today, right? So today's standards are current inflation. Inflation is going to probably stay the same a little bit-ish, right? It may go down, may not, but we'll just keep it constant. You got to list your assumptions, right? You list that the fact of construction costs, whatever they are. You can go off and take an extrapolation post COVID. Do you need $40 million in 10 years, 20 years, 15 years? We need to actually go off and actually put an assumption down. What is it? Is it $5 million in the next 5 years and then another $40 million in 15 years? You've got to define it, because we can't give you a rate. And I respect the committees, I think, done a good job of articulating. We just want to throw, you know, pennies at it when we should be throwing something else at it. We want to be effective, but we have to define the current problem today. And I know you don't have a crystal ball. I'm not asking you for a crystal ball. What I'm asking you to do is define the problem today. It's going to change tomorrow. And that's why I said you're going to be wrong, but you will be right today. So based upon that, can you guys go do that as we go and proceed to the other rates? Let you guys work out in the background and define how much, when, especially capital, right? That's the big piece that we're looking for. How much capital you need and when. And define that for us today. It's going to be wrong, but it's going to be today. We're going to document that and say that's what that is. And then Deb can go off and calculate a glide path along with Katie and stuff and say, okay, cool, based upon that, that's what you need. You know, we can go off and say, okay, we're going to do a little bit less because we're going to hope for some goodness somewhere else. Cool. We can explain that all damn day. But we have to define this. I know it's uncomfortable. On the flip side of it, if you list your assumptions, you're always right. Because you go, with these assumptions, I know, I've done engineering for 30 years. I get it. It's a challenge. Any other comments? I want to make sure we get everyone a good chance. It's been really good dialogue. Deb has really coached us into this one, so it's one to talk through. So it's a good job by all. If there isn't, I do need to ask if there's any public comments.
There is no public comment.
They will. They're going to come. And I think you've all done a really good job of advocating for those common ones. I appreciate the social board input. Water's one that, you're right, water has come up a lot. And then also, why am I paying for this security officer? Who is that person? They've actually literally got that question two ratings ago. Based upon that, let me double check my agenda, make sure I'm behaving for once. So I think we have adjournment. The next meeting is when?
Pretty soon, couple weeks, is it? Katie, it's
November 15th.
Yeah.
Thank you. November 15th. And we'll see whether or not we're going to be together, or, well, we'll be together, but virtually, or.
Yes. It's touch and go at the moment because from the power outage that the city had on last Thursday, there was a power surge. And so it kind of wrecked all of our equipment in the public safety training room.
I didn't even hear about the power surge.
Yeah. So anyway, so we figured out the problem, and so our parts are on back order. So we're not sure when they'll be here. So we're kind of up in the air at this point. So I'll be in touch as to whether or not we're virtual or back in person.
I personally like the virtual, but that's just me.
Well, I love being able to see all your faces and hear the dialogue. Like, I mean, it just, it was I thought it was a great meeting. And I'll just leave you with one bit of, wishful, fingers crossed. I worked with Carlton, and we had like 12.5% rate increases for multiple years because they needed a new transmission line. And they implemented the first couple, and then they were successful at getting some funding from the legislature. And all of a sudden 12.5 became something like 6, which to them seemed great because it was, basically cut the rate increase in half. So hopefully there will be a more affordable solution. But in the meantime, I'll work with Lance and Katie to project something out based on what we know or what we can feel, is our best estimate, and we'll bring that back later in the process. So thanks for all your really good discussion.
Anything else? I got thumbs up from Derek. Nice. Anything else, Katie? Otherwise, we're going to adjourn. All right.
Good night, everybody.
Good night, everyone.
Take care.